All right, so next question. I saw a quote the other day, and it was "One truth, many songs." And basically, it went on to speak about religion versus spirituality. And so I just kind of wanted to touch upon that. Like, I know that I've seen that if you actually compare the teachings from the Buddha and the teachings from Jesus Christ, Yeshua, they're actually the same.
Mm-hmm.
So can you speak to that about like one truth and then like religion versus spirituality?
Sure. It is true that there is one truth. And I always get a kick out of when people say stuff about my truth. Because that's such an ego statement.
I've gotten hit on that one before.
Have you? I love that. Because there is no my truth. There is the truth. And the problem is that people don't recognize the truth because they're so caught up in what they want my truth to be, and that would be, there is spiritual truth. Now, remember that based on where you're at in your journey, that truth may look different, right? Because, and I've spoken that a million times, what exists as truth here may not exist as truth in a higher dimensional space. However, when you're talking about truth that transcends this reality, truth is truth. And all of the major world religions point toward truth, capital T. The downside is that the dogma associated with major world religion and the fact that the ones who have been in charge of kind of preaching the gospel, so to speak, haven't done it. They've been doing it from the space of the ego by and large. So the message gets very cloudy. But yeah, the Yeshua and the Buddha would have the same message. Of course they would. They both did their work in India and they studied the Upanishads and the Vedanta. I mean, like, of course. So, because that's truth. And that doesn't mean, don't hear me wrong, whoever's going to hear this and get their gander up. I'm not saying that Hinduism is some kind of the ultimate religion. That is not what I'm saying at all. But it is very accurate that the ancient understandings that came forward in the form of the Upanishads, they had nothing to do with religion. These were sages who went into very deep meditation over very long periods of time, and their sole purpose was to investigate and dive into consciousness itself, to understand consciousness. That was their purpose. And of course, in doing so, what they uncovered was truth. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. And then that's what the Buddha ended up teaching, and that's what Yeshua ended up teaching. Religion, unfortunately, is just taking truth and then trying to make it accessible to those who can't understand truth. It's very admirable and honorable in its initial presentation, but without those capable of understanding and those who have actualized those understandings being the ones to, present it, it has no, how do I say, it has no real power behind it, right? The reason that when you sat with Yeshua or the Buddha, you experienced such shifting wasn't because of them as people. It was the energy that they carried, because they weren't identified as individuals. Now, you identified them as individuals, but they weren't in their own perception. So because of that, you were sitting with God. And any liberated being, that's what's going on. When you are in their presence, you are in the presence of the self, capital S, and that is singular. It's not that Jesus as God was different than Buddha as God, different than Sai Baba as God. You understand.
Yes.
Confucius as God, not any different, because the self is the self. It is singular. God is singular. So when the personality is stripped away from anybody, what remains is God. Mm-hmm. And this is where religion has gotten so twisted. We have this sense that, and it's an interesting thing now that I'm sitting and looking at it like with you. If I look at the Christian faith, or even if you look at how it relates to monarchy, the whole point was always meant to be, if you were the queen or the king, you were God. That's what it was. That's the symbolism of the monarch, is that they, in going through the ceremony of taking on the crown and the staff and the whole thing, that they are transformed into God. And then a direct line, like you would see the Christ as a direct line between humanity and God. And that's what the monarchy is supposed to represent. It's a very beautiful thing when you see it that way. If you ever watch the series The Crown, it's beautifully presented. That's exactly what Queen Elizabeth was instructed, that when she took that on, the personal self went boop. Personal self takes a complete backseat to your role now. You're no longer her. Now you are the queen, and you are, they don't say you're God, but that's basically what it's pointing to. Same thing with the Pope. The Pope is supposed to be like the direct conduit of God. And archbishops and all of that, same thing, right? You'd like to think your own priest or your own rabbi or your own minister is the same thing. And that's where it's gotten tricky. The need of the people for more and more shepherds to follow has left humanity in a position where there aren't enough shepherds who are really qualified to lead the people. And so we've had to have more shepherds who really aren't truly ready to take on that level of shepherdom. Now, please don't get me wrong. That is not to say anything negative about anybody who functions in the clergy. That is totally not it, because every one of them has sacrificed to do what they're doing, and they are doing it with the right intentions. Please don't get me wrong there. But I have to be very realistic about what has happened on the planet. In order for someone to truly guide another person, to assist them so that consciousness can unravel, then the guide has to function outside of the mind. It's just the only way. If not, then the guide, that is identified with the mind, that mind has its own agenda, and it has its own self-serving needs. And so those get utilized in its service to others. You understand? Mm-hmm. And that doesn't lead someone to enlightenment. It can't. It can't. So without a clear channel and a clear guide, then there's only so much work that can be done there. So does that answer the question? I think it does. Spiritual truth is spiritual truth. But the only ones who really can, I hate to use the word teach, but you kind of have to. The only ones who can really teach it are the ones who have actualized it. And they aren't always people who are in the positions to do it. It could be just your neighbor. Your neighbor could be Christed and be the perfect example just through the way they live their life, right? Without being in the position where they look like they're teaching people, but maybe they're the perfect teacher because people witness them and go, oh, like that's, wow, that was amazing. Look at how she handled what just happened there with her neighbor. And,
Yeah.